Protect your peace however you need to.
Do you want to be right or do you want the relationship?
Radical environmentalism.
Boogeyman.
What's wrong with Kansas?
A huge issue for Montanans.
Mr. Sheehy's going to get to cash in.
They're told they're not good enough.
Destroying those lives.
Going to get paid before they put out the fire. Jackassish, borderline idiotic.
It's very scandalous.
You mean right to work for less? Anything else you guys want to throw at me?
Welcome to Strangers Talking Politics. I'm Alli.
I'm Bethany.
I'm Jesse.
And today we have an amazing conversation happening. We have one, possibly two strangers coming in. We'll see how that goes. But today we have Derek. I'm going to let you intro yourself.
Yes, my name's Derek Hitt. I like long walks down short piers. I'm from Missoula, Montana. I am a Teamster and a business representative for it, but I'm currently here as just a Teamster.
Okay, so we are going to start our conversation off with one of the most original ideas anyone can ever have when it comes to a podcast, and that is reading a Reddit story. So, our Reddit story for today is an Am I the Asshole? This is from like a year and a half ago, just to preface. Am I the asshole for creating a list of topics of conversation that are off limit when my son visits us? How do we feel about the title?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Because we're in a time where a lot of people I know have to do that. They are right in the throes of this very situation where we have to decide, what are the boundaries of conversation because it is so explosive politically.
Absolutely. So based off the title alone, do we think she's the asshole?
No.
Okay.
Maybe.
Oh, Jesse says maybe. Okay.
Yeah, I think it just kind of depends, right? Because if she's saying, well, you can't say anything negative about the people that I like, but I can say anything I want about the people that you like.
Mm-hmm.
Fair.
Different
Okay.
story.
All right. So I'm going to read her post and then we can go into any sort of comments or we can just go into a discussion. We'll see how we're feeling. So my female 55 and husband, who is 60 male, and our son, who is 30, have completely different political views and opinions, and both of them are stubborn. So every time our son visits us or we visit him, they end up arguing about politics. I find the situation annoying because I only see our son every few months, and I would like to enjoy the time we spend together as a family instead of being left on the sidelines while he argues with his dad about topics they would never see eye to eye on anyway. My son is coming to visit us this weekend, so I made a list of topics that are off limits for when he is over at our house and made it clear to both my husband and my son that I don't want to hear a word about any of the topics on the list. My son agreed to this easily. My husband didn't. He says that I'm restricting his freedom of speech, and we got into an argument about it, and his stance is that he has the right to say whatever he wants under his roof, and if our son doesn't like it, then he doesn't need to visit. My stance is that this is my house too, and I want my son to keep visiting us without every visit ending up in an argument with his dad. I don't feel like avoiding political and controversial topics is too much to ask, but I would like an external opinion. So, am I the asshole?
So my main takeaway is she didn't bring up the list of what her topics are. Because, if she's like too extreme, like you can't talk about this person, yeah. But if you're just like general vibes, because we all have this issue with somebody in our family where it's just like, we know they want to get their point across and they want those brownie points where, I have people in my life where I tell them about Google Scholar and they freak out because that's where I go. It's like, I want scientific facts. I don't want opinions about it.
Protect your peace however you need to. It's your home, your household. I think that it's totally appropriate to set guidelines for guests in your home and in some cases your significant other. Now, they're all right to disagree with it, but I think she's coming from a good place trying to protect the peace in their home.
I would agree with that. Okay, so let's go into a couple of the comments. One of them is just ask him whether he would rather be right or be happy. He can choose to give into his ego and his need to be right, or he can foster a harmonious relationship with his family. Is being right really worth sacrificing his family? And then follow up with you and your son by meeting away from him outside the house and tell him he's not allowed to participate if he can't behave himself. And then someone commented under that and said, that's what my therapist told me. Do you want to be right or do you want the relationship? Someone else said, who wants to bet that the son doesn't like talking about politics with his dad because it always ends in arguments? And that's why the son was so quick to agree, because he just wants to enjoy having time with his parents. And then there was one more that said, let's see. Oh yeah, not the asshole. My aunt used to bring an Uno deck to every family gathering. And if people started talking politics, she would just start dealing out Uno cards and tell everyone that if they couldn't find something better to talk about, they clearly needed some sort of entertainment. People finally stopped fighting over politics because they didn't want to be forced into playing Uno.
I like that so much. That's so awesome. Yeah, it's such a difficult situation, right? Because it's more than just, it's more than just setting boundaries at this point, because if the people that you love can't respect your boundaries, what does that say about your relationship? And so while it might seem like it's this small thing, really on the back end of that, it's not. It's not a small thing, because it's a statement about how they regard you versus how they regard themselves. And that's really difficult to navigate in a lot of households. If you can keep it on that surface level of boundary is set, everybody respects the boundaries because we love each other. And even though I may have these thoughts, I care more about I care more about this person and not hurting them than X, Y, and Z, thought or opinion.
Well, also you got like so many facets to it too, because it's a generational thing. Like, you got your parents like telling you not to curse in the house or something like that, where my house, my rules, but their house, their rules. But at the same time, the one thing we do not have a luxury of is time. What time do you want to spend with them? But is the relationship so toxic where they're so into this that it's become their personality, where you can't talk about the weather before it turns into politics, or you can't talk about your kids' sports without turning into politics? If they're that toxic about it, then yeah, these are the ground rules you need to go with, because without it, it's going to turn into a fight where they're almost egging on the fight. I know plenty of people in my family that are like that. So I get it.
I agree. Jesse, do you have anything to add before we move on to our next topic?
I don't, but I wanted to let you know that I do have Reilly here at the table.
Yay. Okay, wonderful. Welcome, Reilly.
Thanks so much for having me today, and good to meet you all audibly, if that's a word, audibly. But my name is Reilly Neal. I'm running for U.S. Senate in Montana and opposing Steve Daines in 2026. I'm a former state legislator and a longtime newspaper publisher from Montana.
So jumping into our first topic, let's have a conversation about the shift of voting in the unions from solidly left to solidly right.
Boy. So the way I look at it is there's been a shift mostly in our trade side, because like I believe Teamsters are in the similar boat as the trades, where we've seen a lot of our work being, especially like in the Clinton area, we had NAFTA come in where it just gutted a lot of our stuff, a lot of our workforce, a lot of our bargaining ability, and just it was the perfect storm this session of election cycle. I know I was out there on the doors every day. I could tell you there was a lot of people that were telling me about splitting the ticket on certain things, and other things they weren't. I just know there were a lot of people that were working in the fossil fuel industries, the refineries, stuff like that, were concerned about their livelihood. But at the same time, they didn't see all the projects that were coming up that were green. We had the hydrogen hub over here in the St. Regis area, which is probably defunct for the foreseeable future, which was going to have 3 phases where they were going to have hydrogen for semis. And also they were going to start testing with Boeing for hydrogen for airplanes, which, I mean,
When you say defunct, is that a recent?
well, after executive order that rolled back every green initiative, yes.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, especially for that area, right? Like that would have been absolutely huge for that area of Montana. Mineral County is one of the poorest counties in the state, and especially after they lost the mill in Superior. And so to have a project of that magnitude dropped like that is a huge deal. It's a huge loss for Montana.
Absolutely. I mean, that project it was estimated to be roughly the first phase to be $1 billion, which is nothing to snuff at. And that's a production thing with maintenance on it. This is not it was going to be an actual green energy refinery for us. And even there was talks about geothermal at the time too, but all that green energy stuff is now gone.
Do you think part of it is this idea that we're talking about these potential future projects that may or may not exist? We really hope they are going to. But on the other hand, we have jobs currently in places like Colstrip and all across eastern Montana, the High Line, that are providing for families as we speak. And they worry that maybe by voting for Democrats, they're gambling on their future.
I mean, yeah. I mean, you look at like just Colstrip alone. I mean, it's a do or you don't because they know coal is a dying industry, but at the same time, those are good paying jobs. And that's another thing. You look at like a wind farm. You go by a wind farm, you'll see 1 or 2 trucks. You go by Colstrip where they're adding on a new scrubber unit. You'll see anywhere from 100 to 150 rigs out there of people working on that to try and make it cleaner, to try and make it better. I mean, we get that it's going to be changing. I mean, one of my good friends, he's a 4th generation Boilermaker. His great grandfather used to shovel coal into coal-fired train. And when he first saw a car, he was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Didn't really think about it.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, but I have to wonder, and I have to ask, like, do we really know as a population, are we majority convinced that coal is dying? Because I have heard from lots of people, well, commonly online, for example, when we talk about green initiatives, well, what do you think powers all of this? It's the coal that we dig up in Montana and so forth. And so I wonder oftentimes, especially with messaging from the right about reviving coal jobs and these kinds of things, the right has messaged to those people specifically that perhaps they don't know that it's going by the wayside for other forms of energy.
Oh, they know that it's going dying. I mean, last year we also had a major layoff on one of the mines down there by Hardin. We had, I can't remember the amount, but there was a lot. And then like even just palladium. I mean, look at Stillwater. I mean, we lost about 200 jobs down there. Those are really good paying jobs. I mean, you're not gonna go from hard rock mining to working at McDonald's or something else. I mean, without some drastic life changes.
Well, they are good paying jobs. And the reality of the equation is a lot of those layoffs are a result of competitive pricing from other natural resources. But when it comes to the discussion on the ground in those communities, there's a big push to say these jobs are going away because of radical environmentalism. These jobs are going away because we don't have people appropriately supporting the industries. Do you think there's a disconnect between what's happening in those communities and what's happening at, I guess, the corporate level that's really influencing these decisions to have such massive layoffs?
So what I'm seeing, and a lot of times you'll see in Colstrip, is just the green initiative is the boogeyman. So people not going down there and understanding what they're going through and giving them an avenue to, because we've also talked about like, how do you retrain somebody for that? Because a Boilermaker is not going to make a good nurse. We have too many calluses on our hands, or anybody in the trades. I mean, no offense to nurses. I get your profession. Thank you very much for your services on that, because that is a special kind of patience you don't give a blue collar person. I mean, we will be cursing. We might get a little rough with the patient because we're not that kind of person. We need to have avenues where a blue collar job turns into a blue collar job, not just blue collar to service industries. Because let's be frank, some of the guys that I work with at the refineries when I was on my tools, you don't want in service. They're great people, but they're not the front of the house. They're more the back of the house.
Riley, statewide office, but you do live in the Eastern Congressional District. You've spent a lot of time over in Eastern Montana. What do you think that disconnect is? Why we're seeing some of those people in the trades moving further and further right, even within the union camps?
I think the socially conservative union members are seeking candidates and representatives who favor more right-wing cultural policies. And I think that, to the point of the initial question, why are people shifting in unions to having more of a conservative bent rather than a progressive bent? It's that there's appeal. There's appeal from these representatives who are offering members these socially conservative cultural norms. And I just think the economic struggle of the American family is real. No matter if you're socially conservative or if you're more progressive, that economic struggle is real for all workers. And at least as a perspective going around Eastern Montana and hearing from folks about what's important to them, having one good job and a living wage is a pretty common issue that we hear about. That's usually someone's top priority, that I have one good job that I can depend on to pay my bills, and I should be making good money for that. So when it comes to folks in unions wanting something more socially conservative, I don't think there's a massive disconnect as far as socially conservative and socially progressive when everybody's facing the same issue, which is we need a job and we need a living wage.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What do you think over in the studio?
I mean, and also his messaging too on the last cycle. I mean, no offense to one side or the other, but there was a certain message that came across like, hey, we're not going to tax your overtime. We're going to make stuff cheap again. And, that had an appeal because let's face it, right at the time, there was a lot of uncertainty. People were feeling greedflation for what it was, because let's be honest, it was greedflation, and people were racking in extra money on the stock buybacks and all the other good stuff, but everybody else common folk were struggling. I mean, our members were struggling. I mean, yes, we went and voted for endorsing candidates, but we endorse, but we don't tell our members, hey, this is who you have to vote for. We just like, hey, these are the people that are going to align most with your core values for your paycheck.
Right. And Donald Trump, he successfully tapped into working class frustrations with populist messaging, and his opposition to globalization, his emphasis on American manufacturing and criticism of China, that resonated, it seems like, with many union members who felt abandoned by the Democratic leaders who weren't addressing these things.
I think it's really interesting. I listened to a podcast doing a breakdown on a book called What's Wrong with Kansas. And this was a book done in the 90s. And it was about primarily the working class, I think in the South, and like union voter registries shifting from the right to the left. And I think that if we don't address also kind of the elephant in the room of how this has progressively been happening since the civil rights movement, and how the civil rights movement does in some measure, I think, play a role in the shift from being stalwart left voting for unions to now gradually migrating. And then when you see throughout time from the 60s and the civil rights movement, Nixon and Reagan, and even to some degree Clinton, they all kind of hit on this, well, you don't need unions anymore. And they did union busting tactics. They played into that soft spot of racism, I think, to some degree. And I think that all also played into this big national shift from the left to the right. I think that had a lot to do with initiating it. And then in this last cycle, obviously, the Republicans were incredibly effective at hitting on those simple issues, the simple basic issues like Derek and Reilly were talking about, of the household bread and butter issues. This is what I sit down when I sit down to pay my bills at the table. This is what I'm facing, and this is what I have control over. And the Republicans really spoke to that so much better in the messaging department than the Democrats did.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to take a quick break. Thank you so much for listening. We wanted to give a shout out to MCAT for letting us use their studio space and equipment. If you're enjoying the show so far and would like to be a part of the conversation, visit us at stppod.com. That's stppod.com. To hear more from our strangers, you can find them at their socials linked below in the description. Okay, enough of that. Back to the yapping you came for. Welcome back. All right, we've got one more topic before we jump into a few questions. So topic 2 is about federal layoffs, specifically how that is affecting Montanans.
Well, I'm traveling all across the state right now. We were in Havre, Kalispell, Missoula, Livingston, and we just minutes ago wrapped up a listening session with folks in Helena, Montana. And every single group has talked about how this is going to affect their communities, their workforces. In the last, we've been on the road for about a week and a half, and every single community is facing this in a different way. Whether you're up in Havre and these are USDA cuts, whether you're in Livingston, just north of Yellowstone Park, and these are National Park Service and U.S. Forest Service cuts. These cuts, whether you're in Helena, we had people who are working in the education sector, and these cuts are already starting to affect them in disability sectors. So this is a huge issue for Montanans. We're talking hundreds of jobs just being completely eliminated.
Yeah, I think as far as our federal delegation is concerned, specifically to Montana, they're in complete denial or delusional in respect to how this impacts the people of our state and how Montanans feel about it.
Yeah, they're silent. They're being completely silent right now.
Yeah.
Not speaking. We visited with, 50, 60 people in the last couple of days, and in all of these groups, people are stunned. They're shocked. They're outraged.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, right? So far the layoffs in Montana, I read a figure that said there's been 360 jobs lost. So when we contextualize that for Montana, when we think about, say, for example, like when there were the layoffs at the Stillwater mine, like we talked about previously, or, layoffs at Roseburg, a mill, those are usually around 100 jobs-ish. And those by themselves are huge, huge hits to a community. So 360 jobs in Montana in just one round is a big deal. It's really putting Montanans at a disadvantage, especially because there is not necessarily replacement income available, especially in the smaller communities.
In February, in Havre?
Well,
No.
and they're trying to push them into working at the Amazon warehouse or doing some of there's that new candle company over in
Glass Baby.
Yeah, Gillespie in Lewistown, which is great. That's 100 jobs, but it's 100 jobs at $20 an hour, whereas these were high-paying positions that are central to the communities they served.
Right, with benefits and with pensions in some cases, and all that was just erased overnight. We had someone write us in from the Lewis and Clark Interpretive Center to tell us that now they're down to a skeleton crew and they don't really know how they'll be able to serve the tourists who are coming, the individuals, the schools, education opportunities they used to offer to the community. Those have been severely cut, as well as the jobs, the actual jobs they said the person who was cut of their small team of 4, so that's 4 people just lost their 25% of their workforce there. So they're saying this is really, it's a shock, and it's going to be really tough for them to operate. And it's really awful because this was a great worker and a good employee who worked well with their team.
So this hits home to me because my first union was Nifty. I was a hotshot firefighter down in San Bernardino for 2 seasons down there. I helped create our hotshot crew of Mill Creek hotshots. So this hits harder to me because I know what is coming now, because they have drastically frozen all hiring for firefighters. They have laid off the majority of firefighters. The only one I know that would benefit from this is our new senator. I'm going to throw that out there because he has a privatized firefight. What are we going to do when we don't have our federal firefighter professionals at it? This is scary for us because wildland firefighting has been getting worse and worse each year. We have February fires. We have January fires, December fires that are just devastating. And the other thing about it is for each one of those jobs that's gone, that is money that goes into the community that is now gone.
Yeah, I think that's really an interesting point as well, because essentially what we're doing for, people like Tim Sheehy who have their privatized fire bomber service is we're putting ourselves at a disadvantage because we're going to absolutely have to have their service because we don't have federal services available. So essentially, we have created this huge demand that they can now jack up the prices on supply because supply is in such short availability. And so when you have a government contract, which they're going to have to do, guess what they get to do? Mr. Sheehy's going to get to cash in.
He will cash in. He's planning on it.
Now, I live in a pretty conservative community, and one of the counters that I hear to this fairly often is, yes, we're upset about these jobs going away, but this outcry from Democrats is misplaced or inauthentic. For Deer Lodge, just look back at the Bullock administration when they shut down the licensing office, and that took 36 some government jobs out of Deer Lodge. The argument is that this is happening with every party, regardless. Why are Democrats suddenly upset about it?
The other thing about it is, like, you think about it, is these recent layoffs. These are also veterans that are losing a job that they are now wanting to be of service to their country yet again, but yet they are told they're not good enough, which is bullshit. Let's be blunt. And also, we don't need scooper fire planes here because, let's face it, we don't have the lakes to do that. You could do that in Minnesota, but here, water scoopers are, how do I put that, special? But another thing about it is just like, we know we're going to have a bad fire season coming up. And where are we going to get those resources? Because also, that's another thing, is the private sector is hurting for manpower too. These people aren't going to jump over to that side just because they lost their job.
I think to Jesse's point about, the counter, well, where were the Democrats when they were laying off people? I think it's a valid point. Anytime that we downsize the government, you're talking about putting highly skilled, highly trained employees in many cases who this is their dream job. They have put a lot of time, effort, and money into attaining the skills for these specific jobs. It's always going to be difficult. But I think there's a marked difference between what is going on now and what has gone in the past. For example, when you get people getting an email, a mass email, hundreds of people that says, we're going to terminate you for poor performance, even though their evals that they've had said, no, you're doing great. You're doing a knockout job. Now, not only after they've gone through all this vetting process and after they've gone through jumped through all of these hoops to get these dream jobs, they're not only losing it, but they're losing it in a very cold and indignant way. They're losing it without any kind of safety net, which generally speaking, there are safety nets employed of some sort. When Democrats cut jobs, they tend to at least be somewhat compassionate about it and offer severances of some kind. And then also, when you see an image like Elon Musk, I'm just going to affectionately call him Leon, when Leon gets on stage with a chainsaw and is bragging about taking a chainsaw to the bureaucracy, he's talking about mutilating those people's lives. He's absolutely destroying those lives and bragging about it in the most ostentatious way. And I have never seen a Democrat do something like that.
Even piggybacking off of that, when you did have the reduction of workforce under Clinton, he gave him a heads up that this was happening. He also gave him a year's worth of wages to confiscate them. None of that has been happening. This is just literally a speed run of what he did to Twitter. And unfortunately, private sector and government are two different beasts. Government works way different than the private sector, where you can't just smash and burn and then add extra money to your stockholders. The stockholders are the people. You are taking away services from us.
Well, we've seen in this country throughout its history that there are some things that shouldn't be switched to a for-profit enterprise. Firefighting, chief among them.
Absolutely. If you can start a fire and make money out of it. Not that I'm saying Tim Sheehy would do that, but if you're going to capitalize on disaster rather than you shouldn't be in the business of capitalizing on disaster. The benefit of having government oversight of these particular employees is that it is without any self-interest that we go and do these jobs, and we pay for these jobs. We pay our taxes so these jobs can be done, whether it's people doing soil conservation in Hill County, or whether it's folks doing sanitation and custodial work in our national parks, or whether it's a night nurse at the VA. These are people who are doing really important work with no self-interest.
Well, when a public fire department sees a fire, they try to put it out.
Right.
Throughout our history, if it's been private, they want to know that they're going to get paid before they put out the fire.
Great point.
Or they let it go so it'll get up a hill and be a bigger fire.
Is there anything about these federal layoffs you have heard that is like incorrect? Like I've seen some people say like, oh, well, the people who are getting laid off is because they weren't good at their job.
Yeah, so it was an arbitrary guideline. I believe it was people who were still in their probationary period. So depending on what branch, it's either within their first year of employment or first 2 years of employment. That was the majority of them. There were a few other guidelines as well, but they were all pretty arbitrary and not based on the skills these people brought to the table, whether or not they deserved to be employed. It was just a giant cut. I mean, I think it was Yosemite over in California where they fired the locksmith, and there's nobody else that had the skills or background to unlock the bathrooms.
Yeah, it's really interesting for the, when you say it's arbitrary, it's like, I don't even like to say it's arbitrary, right? Because I don't think they're putting really much any thought into it at all. They're not reading through these employees' files to see what they do, to determine whether or not what they do is important, to determine whether or not their performance has been good, what their evals are looking like. And I think it's important for the listeners to know that probationary periods in federal work are oftentimes much longer than the private sector. The average probationary period in the private sector is 90 days. In federal work, it's at least a year, sometimes 2. So some of these people have already put in, like say a year and 3 quarters, but they're still technically probationary. I've heard some stories where people have accepted promotions, and that has put them into a probationary period. And so now, even though they might have been with that organization for umpteen years, however long, and they're experts and they do great work, because they're probationary, they now have lost their career, their lifelong career.
Well, and that's not even touching on the jackassish, borderline idiotic standards, like the request that employees email back a list of 5 things they did in the prior week. I mean, it's not only a dumb thing to do for any CEO or boss, it's impossible. How are you going to review 2 million plus emails? How are you going to make any kind of decision other than these people weren't on vacation, they were able to check their email on a Friday night, and they replied? Because the information they put in it will not be read by anybody. I mean, the Department of DOGE has, 30 employees? It would take them an entire year to read any of that content. It was a needless exercise. It was wasteful, and it was cruel.
And it's not to dismiss that there's no government waste, because I hear that from lots of individuals who are like, this is great. Things are actually happening to cut the waste. It just seems like this really indistinct way of firing our federal employees without notice, in some cases illegally, and saying that they were not performing. That's not the way to cut waste. We have inspector generals who work on this issue. And if we wanted to do this, we could do it in a way that would be fair to American workers.
I mean, yeah, let's get real. They're trolling. That's all it is. The department is a troll name led by a person who's trolling the entire country because he's the richest person in the world and can do whatever he wants. It doesn't actually make sense other than to piss people off. And that's what he's doing.
It's working in Montana.
My final thoughts on it is just, it is ridiculous that they are doing that. Also, who's going to read it? He's probably going to use his AI, which, couple of people I might know, I like to call them gremlins, is they might have put a code or 2 in their 5 things to learn. I'm not saying that I condone that or anything of that nature, but it might have happened. And, private citizens could send an email to that because that email is unsecure and it's been put out there for everybody. But at the same time, they are not thinking about who is being affected. They are also looking at it as our national forests and everything will now be understaffed. Therefore, it could be up for sale because there was an executive order about talking about selling our national parks, our national forests, and our monuments.
I think the other part, not only for, the email that we were talking about or, the performance email, I don't think the goal was ever to actually read those emails. I think the goal was to see who did it, who didn't, and assess who would be on the chopping block next by that. But then also to use whatever's in those emails, regardless of what they said, as the quote cause for termination. And I think, like Jesse said, obviously they're trolling, yes, but we need adults in the room. If you want to troll, that's what Twitter is for. If you want to run a country and take care of your people, that's what the White House is for.
Well, and Derek, I think you really hit at the heart of the matter. It's about breaking it, making it not work well so they can further privatize it. And so they can, sell off public land, so they can outsource all of these public services to private companies. It's a massive strategy to privatize what they view as a slush fund that could be going into their pockets instead.
I mean, also look at who they have in charge of the DOGE on the VA is a guy that invented a telehealth system. Do you think he's going to break the VA so bad that they have to outsource to him? And you also look at Elon. If you want to say a welfare queen, look at him. How much money has he made off of the back of the US government? If I've ever seen a welfare queen, it's Elon.
Well, even here in Montana, you look at what's going on with Governor Gianforte, outsourcing hundreds of inmates to for-profit prisons in other states, just mostly to the for-profit prison company he owns stock in.
You guys are really hitting at the heart of the matter, right? Is that I think one thing that we all know, whether or not, people admit it or not, is that this is one giant cash grab on every level, in every direction. And if you are not sticking your hands up in the air, trying to catch whatever you can, you're going to be the one shelling out. And I think that is the overall point of what's going on here. They're going to take as much as they can until they cannot anymore. And then they're going to roll out to some other country.
I would like to thank everybody for having this conversation with us. We have a couple more questions for Derek, so we are sadly going to say goodbye to Reilly. If you would like to say your goodbyes, let people know where they can find you. That would be wonderful.
Sure, great. Thank you so much. And this has been really enlightening and informative, and I look forward to being back on this show soon. My name is Reilly Neal. I'm a candidate for U.S. Senate in Montana. You can find out more about my campaign and our listening sessions. We're going all over the state of Montana to every county and hearing people's concerns on the ground. If you'd like to be a part of one of those roundtables, look us up on the internet. It's Reilly for Montana, REILLY for FOR Montana, all spelled out.com, ReillyForMontana.com. Thanks so much again. I hope you folks have a great night.
Thank you so much. I have a couple more questions. Thank you so much for your time. These are questions I have sourced from real life humans and fake life humans, aka the internet. First question, why are unions important?
Unions are important because they are the ticket to the middle class. We, especially the Teamsters, are probably one of the more progressive ones. At our original beginnings, we were one of the few that had all minorities as stewards over white people. We also had females in leadership roles. We still promote our sisters and our brothers to be better and to help them be better. This is one thing about unions is it's a democratic process. If you don't like your leadership, vote them out. And if you want to see better, be a part of it. It's not something to be on the sidelines about. We can change stuff because we're organized.
The next question I have is, how do you feel about the current climate with regards to workers' rights and organizing?
So the current climate is an opportunity, plain simple. You see so much fear and uncertainty. We can give certainty back to people by getting them the ability to organize, to have their first contract, where it's no more the boss's promises and a pizza party, but actually knowing hard facts when your raises are coming, what your working conditions are going to be. I would be honest with you, right now, my phone is blowing up with opportunities of people just sick and tired of the bullshit and wanting something better for them. If us, the Teamsters, can't do it, I will find you somebody that can. But normally, we can do it.
Okay, I have two more questions for you. One is one that I have heard from a real life human, which is unions are more like HR. They're there for the company, not for the employee.
Again, fuck no. We are there to service our members. We are in service of our members. If anybody that is in a union that represents them does not know that, they need to get the fuck out. You have to be there for your membership. It doesn't matter if it's the big pain in the butt in the company or if it's the golden child. We have to represent everybody the same. That is the greatest thing about a union is no matter what, I have to be there for them. You all have to be there for them. It's the same.
And lastly, this isn't a question I had pre-approved, so forgive me.
Ooh.
I know it's very scandalous. How does somebody unionize? If, let's say, I didn't work where I currently work and there wasn't a union involved, and me and a couple of my friends were like, you know what, we're kind of sick of this. What do we have to do?
A lot of us unions have tip lines like, hey, you want to organize? Call this number. So I know with the Montana AFL, they have one on their website too of a tip line. You're like, hey, you want to unionize? Call us. And normally they get it with me on when I was working there, and I would segregate to which union had that jurisdiction. But as now being the Teamsters, we get it all the time where people just call up the local, like, hey, I'm ready to organize, or I have questions about it. So we'll go meet with them, hear their concerns, see if it's a valid concern that we can help them with, or if it's something that, we can help them with, and then we'll get going on that avenue.
For our listeners, I will put those links down below.
I have one more question for Derek on the union front, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
With regard to the 360 Montanans who have just lost their job, is there anything that the Teamsters or other unions have available for them now?
So currently the majority of them are AFG and NIFTY. NIFTY is working with a lawsuit on the unlawful suing the government for unlawfully firing them. Also AFG is too. I've been in kind of contacts with a couple of them. We are there for solidarity. Been helping a couple of them that have been reaching out that want other jobs, trying to hook them up into different avenues of employers that are hiring that are union, or talking to them about, hey, do you want to help us organize an area?
And then one last question, why not another one? We'll just
Keep
throw
it
another one
going.
in. Yeah. So how can the public support their local union members, and how do the local union members support their public?
Union members always kind of support their public because we work in the public. Some people might not know that we're union members. Some might. That's things that we got to change on our own too. We got to be able to show our pride and solidarity in being a union member. It's something that, has been lacking in years, but has been growing at the same time. It's something we've talked about a lot that we want to get out there where people are damn prideful about being a Teamster or being an electrician or being anything that is a union member, because we do help raise the tide for other industries because we are the gold standard, and that brings up their standards too.
Yeah, a rising tide raises all ships. And then how can the community support local unions in their work?
So whenever there is, say, a picket or a strike or something like that, come down and join us. We'll teach you the ropes of what you can do and not do, because there are certain guidelines on how a picket is ran and how it's done. Talk to the captain, bring down water or pizza or something like that for the people that are on strike. Or just if you hear about something like that, just come out and support us. I mean, hell, even just liking some of our posts, that shows solidarity. If there's like just little increments, if you're not ready to jump into the big game.
So, Derek, I might be in the minority within the business ownership community. I've testified at the state level and written a number of editorials and columns in making sure Montana does not become a right-to-work state. But I'm definitely in the minority when it comes to other business owners in the state. I know why I don't want Montana to become a right-to-work state, but do you mind talking to our listeners, telling them a little bit about why we don't want to see right-to-work here in Montana?
You mean right to work for less? Right to work is a nice little word phrase that they came up with to weaken unions. It is a way to weaken the membership so we don't have as strong of solidarity. So when we are trying to have these fights, we're not as unified. It is a way to make a wedge there. Oftentimes those right to work states, they make anywhere from 10 to 20% less than what we do, plus benefits. And they also have higher OSHA injuries and fatalities on the job site. This is something that in Montana, we have a long history of labor movement. I mean, we have local 2 Teamsters here. There is no local 1. We're it. So with that being said, we have a long history and a long bloody history of the labor movement. And the labor movement here in Montana has also helped the non-union sector rise up and keep their industry going. We have to work side by side with our non-union brothers. Yes, in some spots they're competition, but at the same time, competition is a good thing where we can help them help us.
Thank you so much for your time. Can you please let people know where they can find you? And also, we will add links below for you and for the Teamsters for anybody who wants to reach out.
Yeah, I'm with Local 2. We have our website available and Facebook page. And also I am the president of the Missoula Central Labor Council, so the MACLC, and that's also on the socials. So find us there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
Thank
Anytime.
you. That was a wonderful conversation that we had with Derek and Reilly. We went over a lot. It was really informative. How do you guys feel that the conversation went?
I thought it was really great. I always love to talk to a diverse background of people. I think that's really important to get different perspectives. And I think the conversations that we had today really speak to the average person.
I think it was a great conversation. Even when we hadn't recorded an episode, we had talked about how we wanted to make sure we had a good conversation with not just the Teamsters, but union representation in Montana. We're seeing just this massive shift to the right, not only in unions, but with voters and really non-voters in our state and across the country. And to get the Teamsters perspective was, I'm glad Derek came and joined us. And Reilly's hitting the trail hard. She's in communities all across the state. It's nice to have somebody who is running for a federal office come and let our listeners know what they're focused on and how they're going to try to represent them.
I know I do. I really love that. And coming from someone who is not in a union, but where I work does participate in unions.
Union adjacent.
Yes, I'm union adjacent. And also just, having somebody who is in the political sphere, who is like actively campaigning and running and doing all of that, just to even take the time out of your busy schedule to sit down with a small podcast to talk to people who are potentially going to be voting for you is, that to me speaks volumes.
It goes back to the first episode where we talked about authenticity and speaking to constituents and meeting them where they're at. And that's what's really important. And I think more than ever, especially, we've already seen just in the short amount of time that the national representation has been in office, how difficult it's going to be. And I think more than anything, we have to build community, and unions as well as Miss Neal, I think, are really hitting on building that community. So if you need a community to get involved in, there's your options, right? You've got unions that you can rely on for training, you can rely on for bargaining, you can rely on for support of many different kinds. And now you've got a candidate who actually wants to hear what you have to say, who wants to address your issues.
We're a year and a half out from the vote, and I drove over to Helena so we could have her on the podcast. She's not from Helena. I walked into a room of 8 people from this community that she had invited in to get their feedback and learn about what issues are important to them. And it's part of this tour she's been on all across the state. So I would hope that any other candidates who get into the race, and really Daines himself, I'm sure he won't, but I would love to see him talk to Montanans that aren't pre-vetted, that are part of the community.
Anyone who wants to come on. Well, I'll just list off a bunch of celebrities in the comments. But
they're talking to you, Hank Green.
Yes. But we're gonna wrap this up, and thank you guys so much for listening, and be sure to check out the description for any of the links and socials to find out more information about our wonderful strangers, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you for joining us on Strangers Talking Politics. Don't forget to check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube.
Bye.
Bye.